Hi, this is the Racial Justice Committee of the League of Women Voters of Amherst, and we are very, very happy to welcome a very important and active member of the Sunrise group of Amherst. Now, what is the official name of it, Julian? Julian Hines. Is it just called Amherst Sunrise, or?
It's officially called Sunrise Amherst, and our email is sunrisemovementamherst@gmail.com. And my official position is considered co-hub leader. So basically, I run the place with a few other kids.
You became the co-hub leader in 2021 and still maintaining it.
Yes.
Julian is a junior at Amherst Regional High School and very active in much about what goes on with the future of our lives and the world, particularly when it comes to sustaining our environment. He's been involved with things with the trees, the Shade Tree Committee in Amherst. He's done all kinds of things with climate justice and action. He has also been, he also was, got a chance to meet the governors who were running because they wanted the endorsement. And I think our governor now is very much pro climate, and we're going to keep that promise too. And he has been very active, and I'm saying all this because we have a small group, but his resume is unbelievable. He has facilitated workshops. He has participated in so much when it comes to the environment, not just trees, but everything. And he is one of the co-founders of the Amherst Climate Justice Action, and has just done so many things that it's just hard to say them in one short thing. So I'm going to really let him take over, and then we can ask questions of him also. And I'm glad to see you're here, Darcy, because I know how important this is to you. But Julian Hines, I really appreciate you coming in the middle of a holiday weekend and to talk to us. And maybe we can do some things with you guys also. Thank you.
No, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. Sunrise, I can speak for our group, is more than willing to engage with community organizations such as League of Women Voters, etc. We work with the ACJA. Darcy knows about that. Sorry, I couldn't make the last meeting, but we do more broadly engage with the ACJA. And yeah, so I've been in local government for a long time now. Probably not as long as other people on this call, but what feels like a long time to a 17-year-old. Yeah, so I'm happy to take any questions you guys have, and we have a good group of people here, so yeah.
Well, we were given the title of what was the last title? It was the intersection of race and climate, or racial justice and climate. So if you could just explain basically what that is.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, there's a concept that has sort of been coined as a term called intersectionality, but it is more of a concept in the idea that issues don't stand alone. When we discuss, say, environmental issues, it means we're also discussing certain issues with racial equity. And when we're discussing racial equity, it means we're also somewhat discussing environmental issues. I think there's notable examples both here in our town and elsewhere. For example, when you see the difference between the types of resources and environmental programs and that type of thing that a community like Amherst has in comparison to a community like Springfield, that could be an example of an environmental justice issue and how it overlaps with racial equity and the different diversity of each community. And then you also can look at more localized examples here in Amherst. I mean, when you see the certain neighborhoods of color that the police patrol and idle in more often, that means that those communities are more likely prone to those emissions. You also look at a lot of people of color don't have the financial ability to do things like solar panels and maybe an electric car or something like that. So that's another overlap. And I mean, these are all examples. I can get into each one or other examples if we want to raise them, but you also look at like more on a national level, fossil fuel plants and where fossil fuel plants are located and that type of thing. So yeah, it really is an overlapping issue. And I think we see a lot of people who are like very strong on racial equity issues and a lot of people who are strong on environmental issues. And I applaud both those groups for their activism, but we need to see more of them working together, because when we solve one issue, we often solve another issue at the same time. For example, if we do this new zero waste pickup program in apartment complexes around town, that will in turn allow communities that might not have otherwise had the resources to have a backyard to compost in or that type of thing, to now have that service provided directly to them. And those communities tend to be underrepresented communities of color.
Okay.
Go ahead, Martha.
Yes. Okay. Well, Julian, first, I'd like to say congratulations for your winning the award with the governor's picture. I mean, I think the empty frame is just a beautiful symbol that can be interpreted so many ways.
Thank you. Yeah.
You can talk about, well, what people are omitted or included, but you can also just see that's the future, right? It's waiting to be written. But I would like to hear, so my first question would be, I'd like to hear sort of what your thinking was with the empty frame and what the symbol was for you.
Sure. I mean, like for me, at least personally, I would prefer to let people in the public interpret it how they would like, but I certainly see it as an example of how government doesn't always represent and work for everyone. And the people standing in the governor's office, although it's great that we have a woman governor and a lesbian governor, I think that we need to recognize that most of the people standing in that office and in the state house tend to be white, tend to be male. So I think that's an example for children who might want to look up. I think they tend to be older people. Most of our representatives are above 65, not younger people who might not see themselves in government. I think they also tend to be pretty wealthy, have like lineage at different Ivy League universities and whatnot. And that is another thing where a lot of people might not see themselves in government as able to run for government, even when their voices really matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. If I may, follow up with just a different question here then, think globally, act locally. Here we now have Hickory Ridge, 150 acres for our town to plan. And so I wondered if Sunrise has been thinking about it, or what's your vision for what are some of the things we could do at Hickory Ridge as a community?
Absolutely. I saw the firefighters actually training there just the other day. But yeah, so Hickory Ridge is really a great opportunity. How the town acquired it through Barry Roberts is certainly interesting, to say the least, and might not be completely ethical, but either way, it is in our hands now. And it's really great that the town and our taxpayers have that as a resource. I think that it could be used for a lot of things. I think we might want to consider it for a new fire station, the DPW building. but the land may be too wet for that. I talked to our assistant town manager who said that that's a concern. They're currently developing solar on it, and I think that in open spaces that don't have trees, that don't require to be deforested, I think that might be a good idea. But in some of the more wooded and woodland areas of the park, I would encourage us to keep those areas and actually expand on those areas. I'd love to see us reforest some of Hickory Ridge. And I also think that there's been a lot of discussion around possibly making it an area for affordable housing, but not just like capital A affordable housing, but maybe something similar to like what's happening on Ball Lane for really affordable homeownership opportunities for working and middle income families.
Mhm. What about, I was envisioning sort of community gardens, or, since it backs up to the, a lot of those rental communities and South Point, the Boulders and so on, whether there would be specific opportunities for, I don't know, playgrounds for children, or as I say, community gardens or nature reserves, or, things that again would be, tilted toward racial justice in a sense. And
totally. I mean, I would be definitely very supportive of that. I think we could also see a situation where we attract some of the renters in those communities to possibly a new affordable homeownership opportunity there. And I could also see, I know I've talked to some of the conservation and public works crews who have been working on plans to make connection routes from the apartment complexes off of East Hadley Road into that area, so that it's not just folks from Orchard Valley who can go and enjoy the space, but that folks who live on like Riverglade Drive and in the Boulders and whatnot can have a really direct access route to that conservation land, a good place to walk your dogs and enjoy the environment. And I think reforesting some of that land is a real possibility. And so I would be totally supportive of things like playgrounds and whatnot. I know there are currently some walking trails, and I'd love to see more, possibly some bike trails in there as well.
That sounds good. Because
okay.
yeah, I spent a lot of time when I first came to Amherst in 2011 working on the Housing and Sheltering Committee, which now is the Municipal Housing Trust. And 3 of us actually studied and wrote this. And Nancy Greggs, who passed away a few years ago, was one of our leaders, and Greg Stutzman and myself, who knew very little. And so I had to study 4 times harder than they did. Fortunately, I didn't have a lot to do. It was a very snowy winter, et cetera. But we talked to people. And I'm just hoping that it gets utilized and used so that we can build housing in Amherst that is not for wealthy and students with parents who can afford. Let's get some things built that it's more affordable to more people. I absolutely agree, and we could use some of the land to do some of the things that was set up for. So I have a lot of concerns about that. I would like to see it into fruition in terms of how we're building here and how we're not building. So anybody else have anything about housing or whatever? Ash? Muted.
You're muted.
Ash, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you, Julian. I love your suggestion of having a clear access path from the Boulders and those communities to this area. And some years ago, I was involved with a very innovative educator who specialized in creating learning areas in the wild for kids. And one of the first lessons is, don't presume to build all the things you think kids need. Let them do it and give them the materials and the wherewithal to do it. And that would be a great idea. And there's a whole program around this for the kids in the Brooks and all of all the areas connected to it. So I hope you can keep the lobbying up and get some support for this idea. turns out to be less expensive than what people often think kids need, and putting the money into elaborate jungle gyms and all the rest of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, we also like can look at how some of the structures similar to what they did at Kendrick Park can be reused materials and recycled materials. And also to some extent, when we look at somewhere like when I was little at Fort River, we'd spend a lot of time playing on the play structure, but I remember we'd more use the natural environment. We'd put snow on the slide and play in the mud and the wood chips and whatnot. And I mean, like that's just as important to kids' development. I mean, I'm not a teacher, but my parents could tell you.
You are a teacher.
But the other thing I would say is that that neighborhood, something that's very unique about that neighborhood we talk about is that there's a lot of kids there in all ages, and it's one of the few solidly family neighborhoods that we have left in this town. And there's a lot of neighborhoods that are dominated by either students or the elderly, but not much middle-aged people raising children. And I think we need more of that in Amherst.
We'd be better off with having more middle-aged people raising children. Because when we look, that's what's happened to the schools. The population is going down because people come here to retire, as well as retired people come and their children don't take over. They are in other places.
Right.
So
that's why I think that something that's really special about that neighborhood is how many kids are there. And also, like, parents, from a parental perspective, would you rather your kids go and play in the mud in Hickory Ridge, or would you rather them go and play in the middle of the street or out on East Hadley Road or something? Like, it's a much better place for kids to play.
Mm-hmm.
Darcy.
Muted. Darcy, you're
You're
muted.
muted.
Yeah, sorry.
There-
I just wanted to mention and get Julian's thoughts about our, starting on June 1st, there's going to be a public comment period about our new electricity aggregation project, which people in town are really completely clueless about because the prep has taken more than 5 years, and I think people have pretty much forgotten what's going on. But one of the things that was initially planned was to do this, it's, bulk purchasing electricity, and we're doing it with Northampton and Pelham, and we're about to, submit our application. But one of the things that has been initially planned all along is that it was going to be part of a joint powers entity. And a big piece of that was going to be, and we hope still is, going to be a community advisory committee that will, incorporate that intersectionality, try to get people from the community to be on a committee that will advise the aggregation about the types of projects they want it to do, like community solar and other stuff like that, that can involve all income groups. So I know Julian has been following this too, and I guess I'm interested in getting his feedback about that. And I'm worried that the towns are going to drop that piece.
Yeah. What I have been following that pretty closely. Have they already submitted to the DPU? I feel like they have.
No,
No? Okay.
the public comment period is going to start on June 1st and run through June 30th. The big public meeting is on June 6th.
Got it. Okay.
It's only applying for the aggregation. They have sort of dropped the whole joint powers entity piece. They say temporarily, but that's the piece that has the community advisory committee in it. So
I mean, I think the joint powers piece is really important. We look at like a community like Holyoke has harnessed green energy from the dam. We could harness green energy from solar. We could harness green energy from wind, whatever resource we really choose. You look at Westfield and South Hadley, and there's a few other towns in our areas, Turner's Falls, where it's not Eversource. You're paying, rather than paying a large company to get greedy with your money and then use it to destroy our environment, we're paying a local entity that is partially taxpayer funded that can be responsible right back to us. And what that means is that we often can get lower cost services for more green energy and for better services. I mean, so that, and then you also consider that you can hold these people accountable. Like, what can we do if the Eversource CEO decides to invest a bunch of money in Chevron? Nothing. But we can do something if our local community aggregation decides to do that. We can vote them out. So, I mean, it's really about the power is with the people, and how, like, a project like community aggregation has ties with racial justice, has ties with economic justice, has ties with democracy issues, and is at its core a real environmental issue. And I think we look like, I think Amherst is ahead of a lot of its peers in a lot of ways, but in terms of community choice energy, we're really behind the game. Communities like South Hadley, Holyoke, Westfield, that generally we would classify as having less resources than us, have started innovative programs to provide their residents with green electricity that is at a lower cost and provided by people who are your neighbors and friends, not a big company. And I think that that's really an area that Amherst is lagging behind in, and we need to catch up, because that would also make us a more attractive place for families to live if they know they're getting green energy that's at a lower rate than in other towns.
Love it. I love it. Does anybody else have a question or because I'm looking at your resume, that you've been very, very involved. Did you do any work, very much work with the Hitchcock Center?
Yeah, I've worked with a few people from the Hitchcock Center. Susan, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yes, please. I was wondering, I don't have a good sense of Amherst, of the Sunrise movement in general. And I'm interested in whether you tend, as local chapters, look at local problems, or whether there are nationwide, there are one or two things that are your primary focuses.
There is the National Sunrise Movement, which focuses on getting a Green New Deal and promoting racial and economic justice. We are the local chapter of that, so we are basically working in that mission and in that vein, but applying it locally through things like what we've just talked about.
Thanks.
Yeah. Martha?
Okay, so let me ask then, within the high school, okay, you have your group. What efforts do you make in the high school to sort of change people's behavior or make people think green? You know, I'm thinking, let me give you just one little example. Okay, you get to be 16 or whatever, you get your driver's license, right? And so then it's great to be able to drive your car to school, right? And so is that, in fact, saving greenhouse gas emissions? Because if you drive and park and drive home, you don't have to have a family member come and pick you up? Or is it using more emissions because you're not just relying on the school bus or walking or something?
That is a great.
And so I wondered if there are issues that you folks talk about within, the high school and your own behaviors.
That is a really great question. And I I don't get that question a lot, and I don't think most high schoolers do, but it's a really good one. And I think that I can speak from my experience. I used to live close enough to the middle and high school that I could walk. So I would walk to the middle and high school pretty much every day unless it was pouring. And now, and then before that, in elementary school, I took the bus to school most mornings. My parents went to work earlier than the school started, and I would take the bus most mornings. And then now I have my driver's license, I have my own car. We live probably 5 to 10 minutes away from the school, and I do drive because walking or bicycling would probably take about 45 minutes. And I guess to answer your question, it would likely be more environmentally friendly if I were to take the bus. However, I have events after school, such as this, other events in our community that I have to go to where the bus might not work out for me, given that the bus ride is, again, about 30 or 45 minutes. However, I would say it's much more environmentally friendly than having my parents drive me and then drive back home and then drive to their work. So that's, now we have one trip for my mom or dad to drive to their work and one trip for me to drive myself to school rather than 4 trips.
Yes, yes. Well, I just wondered whether,
Good.
I see so many cars after school, waiting to pick up students at all
Yep.
levels.
And they're just idling,
And
sitting there.
idling and everything. And I think, oh dear, is that really necessary? Is there any way to plan better or to carpool more or to schedule activities differently? It seems the whole area that students could work on there.
Yeah, and I mean, to some extent, if you live close to the school, walking or biking is the best thing you can do. But if you don't live close to the school, then I think that really the best option is to take the bus if the bus has other kids on it. The second best option is what I do, which is drive to school. And the third option is to have your parents come and pick you up. And I think that is an option I think that should be avoided as much as we can, because not only does it make more trips, but people's parents sit outside the school idling for 15 or 20 minutes, oftentimes, depending on how long it takes to get out of school. And then you also have the issue of the school buses. I believe we have 1 electric school bus and are purchasing 2 more. However, that still leaves the majority of our bus fleet being gas or actually diesel buses. And what I found that's really actually sort of disturbing is these diesel buses pull up about 20 minutes before school lets out, sit there idling for that 20 minutes, and then sit there and idle for another 15 minutes or so to let all the kids on the bus and then pull off. So in the end, we're probably looking at 30 to 45 minutes of idling time on 20 plus diesel school buses, which if you think the idling on people's parental cars that might get 20 or 30 miles per gallon is bad, now do this times 20 with huge diesel buses. So that I think is a serious problem. And the other problem is that we often at our school have different services, whether it be police or fire or whoever else from our town, come to our school, and they do the exact same thing. They sit outside, idle their cars, go into the school to do their business or whatever they've been called there to do, and then go back, and their cars are still running for the hour and a half they're in the school sometimes. I mean, not only is it illegal, but it's also very environmentally damaging, especially right next to a school. And I mean, one time when we had our school set on fire, actually, they had 17 emergency vehicles parked out there, all idling, and I timed them idling for an hour and 48 minutes. Really? Is this how we want to spend our town tax dollars on that fuel for those vehicles? I mean, I would say no as a taxpayer.
Well, Julian, I am surprised that the Sunrise group there in Amherst has not made an issue out of requiring cars and school buses not to idle in front of the school. I really think that's something you folks should have.
I completely agree. We've talked to the sustainability director about it, who basically agreed with us it's an issue, but didn't really have a plan thought out for what to do about it. And there is currently a state law that idling in a school zone is a criminal offense punishable by a $1,000 fine. And there's signs around our school that say exactly that. But because these are municipal services, there's no way to enforce it. So really what we need to do is call in the Department of Health or the state to address the matter. And in Worcester, that was extremely effective. The bus company and the Worcester School District had a big lawsuit over that, actually.
Okay, thank you.
But I was gonna say, as someone who drives to school and would rather have her grandchildren on a bus, because I cannot begin to tell you how much gas I use, but not in idling, because I get there and I turn it off. Because today cars, you don't have to idle, even if it's cold. If you turn it off for 10 or 15 minutes, it will warm up again. You know, I feel guilty sometimes unless I'm pulling in and it's like I see my grandson or, you know, my granddaughter, and then that's different. But otherwise, I turn it off, and I don't understand why people sit and idle for 15 minutes. That's crazy.
Not only that, but on a lot of cars, there's an ACC feature that's in between where you can still have your AC or your heat, all the lights inside the car, all the lights outside the car still running, but running off of your battery.
My car is one of those cars, and I still turn it off.
For about 15 minutes on the ACC mode. And that does not do anything to the engine. The engine is not on, it just uses the battery. And then once you turn the car on, it recharges the engine. The engine recharges the battery when you're driving. My car's pretty old, and I'm able to use that feature often. So I struggle with why other parents, other students, and our buses and our police and fire department can't do the same.
Marcy?
So when the town's vehicles are electric, when they plug them in, are they plugging them into the grid, or is the town electricity source renewable?
They're just plugging them in the grid. The town is a regular ratepayer, just like anybody else, to Eversource.
Yeah.
That's another advantage of community choice aggregation, is the town could save a significant amount of money to put towards other things that are more urgent, rather than writing checks to Eversource.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's not just about the money, but isn't it sort of 6 of one, half dozen of the other if you are using fossil fuels, or if you're using electric that comes from fossil fuels?
I mean,
it's a lot of what's in the grid.
Yeah, it's better than driving a gas car, but it's certainly an issue, yes.
And my other question, and Darcy, actually, maybe you could, I don't know, could either one of you talk about the composting and recycling, the composting and green recycling project that is potentially going to come to Amherst?
I know a lot about that, but Darcy knows more about it than I do.
Well, you go ahead. This is your time.
Yeah.
Go right ahead, Darcy. You're better at this than I am.
Well, there's a Zero Waste Amherst brought a bylaw proposal, which is now in the Town Services and Outreach Committee, which is basically asking to move from having one licensed haul. There's only one hauler that's licensed to pick up for residential hauling right now, USA Waste and Recycling. And what we are asking for is that instead of having the contract between the hauler and the resident, the subscription holder, meaning individuals, have a contract with the town. If the town had a contract, it would bring the prices down, and it would also allow us to set different requirements out that would help reduce trash. And so we'd like to have a pay-as-you-throw type arrangement, which they don't do at all now. And to have curbside compost pickup available universally, as it is in California and actually the whole West Coast now, Vermont, Boulder, Colorado, a lot of different places that have banned organics in the waste stream. So since food scraps and organics is like almost half of what we throw away, it would put that piece of our waste, it would divert it so that we would have about half as much trash to find a landfill for. So do you have questions, Marcy?
I just wanted to know generally where we were with that. I just came back from spending several months in California, and there are varying levels of compliance. In Sonoma, it's so strict that the haulers, and my friend owns a hauling company, they are required to audit what they pick up. So like they literally, are looking through the trash bags to make sure that the subscribers are not putting in wet garbage and things that shouldn't be in their paper too. But where Santa Barbara is where my daughter is, and there's absolutely no compliance. So it was interesting to see that, but having had that experience, I was very aware. Basically, what ended up in the trash was just a ton of plastic, and that was it. And then, there's just more awareness about that issue. If you have the opportunity to be thinking about it, because you're required to think about it, because that's the way the system is. So anyway, I was just curious where we are. I think it would be great, especially so, there'd be such a usefulness for the compost itself. And I don't know how that would work, but, for individuals and the local farms around, et cetera, it would be really great.
Yeah.
I would just add two things. A is that I think one issue we're going to have with this, we need to talk about, is gaining students compliance. These are people who put styrofoam and mattresses out on the curb.
Yes.
How are we going to get them to do something that's even better for the environment than just not littering?
Yeah.
So I think that's issue A. And I think really we need to get it enforceable so that we can say, if you're not doing this, these are the consequences, and have the university back us up in that enforcement. And I also think that this is really great for property owners and even renters who are working on their property and possibly have a lot of yard waste or leaves or that type of stuff that they otherwise just put in a pile in their backyard, or even put in the trash sometimes, that are completely compostable. And if they have a landfill sticker and a truck to bring it there, then that's what they'll do. But if we can even reduce that trip to the landfill for many people, or at least get a big pile of yard waste out of their yard because it can be picked up by the curb, I think that would be really helpful to a lot of people who want to improve their property. And also, I think we could have possibly a discussion of returning some of that. So basically, they're composting their yard waste, they're composting their food scraps, and seeing, is it possible for us to return some of that compost to them to use in their yard if they wanted it? And I mean, I would personally happily take free compost, and I know that our town DPW makes mulch out of old tree chippings and compost and scraps from the town, and we use it around tree plantings. They use it in our garden beds downtown, and not only is it beautiful, but it's completely recycled. They even put roadkill in there, so sometimes gross as it may be, you'll find an old squirrel or something. But I really do think it's a fabulous program that our tree warden and his staff have came up with. And if we could expand that to not just be about with municipal waste, but actually be with everyone's yard and food scrap waste, that would be great.
Yeah.
Will the proposal that's before the town now, will that have dual stream recycling, that is separate the paper from the cans and?
Yeah, that is, we, the DEP, our DEP coordinator has given the opinion that dual stream is preferred as far as trash reduction. I think that it's, if we go to a contract and we put out a request for proposals, I think it's going to depend on what kind of bids that we get. If I don't know whether we'll be able to confine the RFP to just one choice. I would prefer it myself, but I don't know. All these big national haulers are all going automated, and almost all the automated is single stream. And
Forgive me for not being educated on the topic. Is single stream or dual stream better for the environment? Which is the better option?
dual
Okay.
stream has
Why?
it just has a I mean, it's kind of intuitive because it's already, dual stream, you're already separating out the paper, and it allows the paper to be much cleaner and be able to be more completely recycled. USA has its own recycling facility, single stream recycling. So that's really the only option for USA, whom I'm sure would be a bidder when we get to that point. Right now, Marcy asked what the status is. It's in the Town Services and Outreach Committee. Then it appears to be going to the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee doesn't seem particularly friendly toward it right at the moment, for no good reason, I might add.
Well, does it cost the town more? I mean, that would be a reason to be.
Well, the reason that the town, there are a few towns in Massachusetts that are considered washed hands communities, meaning they don't take responsibility for waste reduction. And that's possible because you can do what Amherst has done, which is just like make it the homeowner's responsibility or the apartment complex owner's responsibility, and then the town doesn't have to do anything. We've always had a recycling coordinator for about the last, 25 years, but in 2019, we lost our recycling coordinator, and in right about 2018, we lost our refuse and recycling committee. And so there has been.
I was on that committee wait, when was that? In the late 80s, I was on that committee. And my claim to fame about that committee was that we were the ones who created those bins, the recycle bins. So the blue ones and the red ones and,
Oh, nice.
the whole system. And we were trying to get it also organized for businesses as well, but that didn't really get off the ground too well.
And
I was going to say, I'm in South Hadley, and we have two cycles. We have actually it might be one cycle. Maybe we just maybe we just divide it up, I guess. Because we have, with the bottles and, the glass and stuff, and then we have the newspaper and paper. And the only problem is we don't get it picked up except every 2 weeks. And I live in a house with 5 people. So 3 of them are children, let me tell you.
Yes.
I have never in my
Yeah.
life.
Well, I think there is still a paper recycling company somewhere down in the Springfield area. Susan Waite was telling me sometime recently that still takes clean paper, that's separated, that's dual stream, clean paper, and recycles it then into higher quality products. Once the paper is soiled and dumped with the cans, then it's only good for making, low quality recycle type things. So that's the difference. So I quit using the trash hauler when they went to single stream, and now I just take everything to the transfer station. And
Yeah,
it
we
still at
take-
the moment has dual stream.
we take
And-
most of our stuff to the transfer station as well. And they have still those old stickers. Marcy, you might remember them. Those old stickers on some of the older loaders and stuff at the transfer station that say support a recycler. And I was wondering, is there any more of those stickers, or are they just sort of a relic from the past that townies remember?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
Well, our league actually worked with that recycling committee to bring about the ban on the styrofoam, use in restaurants and so on. In fact,
I
I
mean-
ended up being the one who wrote the draft bylaw.
I mean, Steve and the crew at the transfer station seem really receptive to these type of programs and these type of ideas, at least when I talk to them. It's more the issue of there's so limited resources. I mean, I was at a recent finance committee meeting. They described the $70,000 scale to weigh different refuse that's coming in as a major expense for the transfer station. Like, that's how underfunded it is, that that they keep raising the rates for the stickers, but that they don't even have really the money to replace things like the scales and whatnot. And it's because most of the money they do isn't through town budgets, it's through people buying and renewing the stickers. And I mean, why have we chosen to underfund what could be a really good environmental program? $70,000 in pretty much any other town budget would be seen as a smallish amount of money. $70,000 out of a $90 million budget is a pretty small amount of money, but the finance committee was ranting and raving about how they don't think they could come up with it.
Yeah.
I think it would be a great investigative journalistic exercise for the high school now that they're top-notch investigators. To do a thing on recycling, like just the illusion that when we put those clamshells and other plastic things that are made from not substantial plastic into recycling, they are not recyclable. They don't work. And then there was a big article, I think it was in the Indy today, about plastics as they're recycled, they become more toxic, and more chemicals are emitted. So like, it's a total illusion that we make the effort, we put the stuff aside, we take it to the curb, we're careful about the timing, and then it's nonsense because it's not really recyclable. And then someone else either has to go through and, sort it out before it's recycled, or it ruins the things that are recyclable because it's too dirty, or, it affects the paper, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really, I think a lot of really well-intentioned people who want to do the right thing, would help to know what is actually the reality here, and what are we really talking about, and what's the impact, the effect, positive or negative. other than us feeling good that we're doing our part, right? Which isn't really true.
Darcy, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, Julian is one of the few people in town who actually has a grasp on the town budget. There aren't very many, and he knows way more about it than I do, for example. And I'm just wondering if you have thoughts, Julian, about that related issue. We talked about how DPW doesn't have adequate staff to do a lot of the stuff that we want it to do that is climate related, or
Yeah.
we just asked for 2 staff people to help Stephanie with her new climate department.
Yeah.
And that didn't get in the budget. And,
Right.
we're compared to Northampton, we are not doing well.
We spend a lot more on capital than we do on operating. They're tight on the operating side, which is the side of the daily services you see, the side of the people's salaries and their working conditions. And then we're very loose in how we spend money on our capital budget. I've studied the budget for probably 800 hours, and past budgets as well, back to 2009, I believe. And basically, I think it could be summed up on, we like spending on vanity projects, but we don't like spending on social justice, on climate issues, or on really bare bones responsibilities a municipality has. And I think that a lot of what we see is, unfortunately, in our budgets, is that as much as I think Stephanie and the sustainability department that's pretty new is great, at the end of the day, the public works department is really the first responder to our climate emergency. And they've been severely underfunded for many, many years. And given the new pressures of climate, it's made it really hard for the workers there to actually keep their head above water with the pressures of regularly working in an underfunded department combined with the pressures of climate change. And I think that we don't really recognize that. Like, we might fund our police department as first responders very, very well, but we're not considering that public works is really the first responder to the climate crisis. And we need to give them some of that funding as well to keep their head above water. And I think you also see this idea in this town of, like, oftentimes when we especially need to remember this on the capital budget side is, yes, new green projects are great, but the best thing you can do for the environment is not build more, is not put up an 8-story building, is not buy a brand new car every 3 years, because that is wasteful consumerism. And that is actually worse for the environment than doing something like building a solar-ready library or buying a police car that is a hybrid that only gets 20 miles per gallon.
Thanks, Julian. You make me feel better about my 20-year-old Toyota Camry.
Julian, what are you referring to as vanity projects?
Oh, the list goes on. I could list quite a bit, but I think recent examples, certainly the library and the track, are pretty expensive versions of that. But I also think that we see capital projects that are even small, like $80,000 for a car. Like, do we really need to spend $80,000 on a car when we have so much underfunding in our department? I mean, I bought my first car for $3 or $4 grand. Like, really? And
Yeah,
I think that we need to have a discussion of, maybe we don't need leather seats and heated steering wheels, but we need safe roads and decent pay for our teachers.
yeah. The library, I know, is a controversial
Is
issue,
great
but
and a great example of vanity projects, really.
But I would argue another side of it, which is that people in wheelchairs can't get through the aisles, period.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a lot of dysfunction in the building now that would require a ton of money to
Yeah.
fix. So, you know, I know it's controversial, but it's complex, and it does
It is.
actually have a lot of intersectionality in it in terms of being friendly to all folks in town, disabled folks, people of color, finding ways to create space in the library where people of color want to come and feel invited and feel safe. The ESL program, which I've been a big part of, you know, needs more space, and farming it out to the other buildings in town would have a big disadvantage, in my opinion. So I just, you know, I just sort of want to say that sometimes I think the capital side of the town budget, I don't know the budget as well as you, Julian, but I see the conflicts because capital projects were kicked down the road for so many years that now they're all bundled at the same time, which makes it look like, wow, we're a town, all we want to do is spend money on buildings. But actually, there's been so much disregard of keeping buildings, you know, working well, the schools, the library, the DPW for sure, the fire station issue. These are all capital projects that show up at the same time because of the history of how it came to this moment.
And I guess I would add, because of the history of underfunding our operating budget. If we had holistic operating budgets rather than huge capital budgets, we could use some of those operating expenses to keep these buildings maintained, so maybe they wouldn't be in the condition they are now. I think, I mean, I don't mean to look backwards, but looking forward, I think that's a conversation we need to be having. And I also think that operating budgets means the materials for maintenance, and it also means the staff people for maintenance. We might not need new superintendent to run the schools as much as we need another janitor to fix up some of the things in our buildings so they're not crumbling 50 years later.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would add that staffing, prioritizing staff is just a really big issue with getting climate action done. And again, DPW, you know, like I don't know what the process is for prioritizing, even if a project is paid for by a grant, it still takes DPW staff time. And so there's only X amount of DPW staff time. And how is that prioritized? Like right now they're, you know, making a roundabout right next to me on Pomeroy Lane.
That's a grant funded project, but I see the DPW guys out there every single day. Right.
So it takes, I mean, the DPW staff is precious. It is so precious. And it's, but I'm hearing they have not even one person to analyze the waste hauler issue.
Correct. And I mean, I look at it this way, is expanding our DPW staff and adding staff for them to keep up with their needs means that we're fulfilling the broader goal of having good green union jobs in our community that are benefiting the environment, that provide a good middle class living. And if we can widen out how many people we hire for DPW, it means we're bringing more green jobs into this town.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Andrea, you are muted, Andrea.
said, Julian, when will you be 18 or so? Can you run for town council? Anyway,
Soon. I've been asked too many times.
just saying, because I really wonder, you know, the priorities that people seem to have are just not the same as the people in the town. It's like, you know.
That's very true. And I think we saw there were certainly issues in our town government under a town meeting. And I don't need to rehash something that happened in 2017, but the charter survey points out that the townspeople and the government are on two different pages of the book.
Yeah. Well, the trouble is the issues are all just so complicated too. Yeah, just of interest here. Seniors at UMass have to take a special seminar. I forget what the charge is, but somehow relating their major to society or something. And so our astronomy department, they chose this time wicked problems. And this is apparently a definitive term developed by an economist, I think. Ash, you seem to know this. So wicked problem is one that doesn't have a clear solution, that's important and time critical, but you know, no clear solution, different stakeholders that may have different impacts and so on. So there were a whole list of criteria, and then you could start listing some of the problems. Well, they took, you know, science related ones, but certainly climate change was one of them, because there's no just simple solution that everybody could get behind. And a lot of things in town are like that too. There's just no clear solution that you could say, you know, if everybody unites, we would put our priority here and, you know, do
Well,
this. And
well,
this
representation is an important issue in town.
Yes.
Our town council has very little ethnic or economic or racial diversity, and much less than town meeting had, even though we were promised the opposite. And I think that we look at it from this perspective. I mean, when I go to town council meetings, pretty much every single person in that room, besides Alicia Walker or a town staff person, is white. And I would say 80 to 90% of our town council are folks from very well-off, wealthy economic standing. And I also think that most of our town council is older folks. That is a very different image than the town I see when I come to school in the morning. When I come to school in the morning, I see hundreds, probably roughly 1,000 young people who are coming into my school each day with very different perspectives. Over 50% of my school are people of color, and 40% live below the poverty line. That's a very, very different image than when I walk into town hall for a town council meeting.
But the trouble is that town council, as it is now, demands a very large number of hours. Dedication. It has expenses associated with it. Yes, they get a small stipend and so on. And people who are younger, who are raising children and work full time, don't have the luxury of the time to devote to it. They need childcare paid. Fortunately, in this next year's budget, there is going to be, I think, at least a small stipends for
I saw that. That was a good idea.
Yes, yeah. Alicia initiated it. Our Racial Justice Committee wrote a support statement, and that was finally in. But the stipends are still low. But this is a real challenge. I mean, how can you change that when the workload is so high? It's a conversation we all need to have. But again, I guess it's a wicked problem, huh?
No, I agree. It's a really good question. And I mean, I love getting involved in town government, and I think it's great for me to get involved in town government. But even like Sunrise, we've had to have a conversation of how do we recruit a different subset of students even to get involved. And I mean, the start of Sunrise, it was mostly white upper class people who were joining. And I realized that and made a significant push to diversify. And now I was at a Sunrise meeting the other night where pretty much every single person in the room was poor, working, or middle class. And I would say over 60% of people in the room were people of color. So it's a matter of how do we diversify. If we're diversifying the organizations who fight in town government, that means we're diversifying the decisions that get made in town government. And although I'd love to see a much more diverse town council, I think the best step we can take is to fight through that by showing them that it's possible. It's possible in my organization. It should be possible for the town council.
Julian, what's the relationship between the Sunrise Movement and POCU in the high school?
Victor runs POCU. There's a few other kids who work in POCU. We work with Miss Custard. We actually just led a walkout with POCU about teacher pay and increasing our teachers' salaries, which is another important issue that we could put a little more money towards. But yeah, we just did that recently with them, and they're a really interesting organization, and I think that they have a great standing within the high school, but it'd be awesome if they could get a great standing out in the community as well.
Yeah.
How about the Environment Action Club? Are they active at all?
Same thing for them. They have a good standing within the high school, but out in the community, not many people really know about them, and I think they need to get a better engagement in the community. The current lead, her name is Tessa, and she's going off to college pretty far away, I think. But the work she's done is great and everything, but I think she's really the only person in the Environmental Action Club who gets out in the town, and we need more people from high school clubs to bring those clubs out into the town. And I mean, I can't be the leader of every club at the school. There's at least 100.
Who's you, Julian, or is just you?
What'd you say? Sorry.
I thought we lost you for a second there.
No, sorry, it just cut out.
Okay. Hey, does anybody else have other questions? Well, I mean, I know we really appreciate, especially your answers, because you do know a lot about what we are interested in, and by all means, use the league. You know, we are trying to get young people, and if you're a high school student, you can join the league for free. So, and you don't have to be a woman, and you don't have to be old. So we really need youthful ideas and answers and things like that, along with maybe some of the other community towns would like to see more young people involved, because, you know, you have answers that we don't even think about sometimes, you know.
Yeah, I mean, everybody brings their own perspective to the table, and that perspective and experience is valid, and it's just making sure that we get enough of each perspective, so to speak, at that table. And it was really awesome to be here, and it was great to hear some questions about things I had never thought of before, and also perspectives that I might see as new or might not agree with, but a perspective that's important for me to consider, like what you mentioned on the library was a good example of that. And I think that it's good to have these type of meetings, both for me to express my opinions and for us to think collectively on how we can move things forward.
Well, I don't need to do anything else, because he's definitely summarized it perfectly. So unless there are any more questions, thank you so much, Julian. We really appreciate you coming, and look forward to watching you in the future.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, you all.
Also, before you leave,
town.
okay, just make sure to take the survey. Okay.
Yes, well, good luck to you and your future endeavors. And,
Thank you.
yeah.